Member Mackinnon. Board Member Shepherd.
Here.
Board Member Wimmer.
Here.
6 present.
Recorded? Do we have?
Yes, we are.
Oh,
Yes.
Okay, because I don't see lights, but that's
You
fine.
won't see lights in here.
There are no agenda changes or deletions. Maybe we could get rid of some of the housekeeping stuff, starting with our meeting schedule. There are a number of days I will not be here, and I'll list them as March 28th, April 11th, June 27, August 22nd, September 26th, and February 24th.
Moving somewhere?
No,
Wait,
just
what was the last one?
October 24th, sorry. So, and I guess I'll send you and Rob an email so that,
I don't think you have to, you just told us.
Okay,
Okay.
but I caught 3 of those.
Okay, I got it. March 28th, April 11th, June 27th, August 22nd, September 26th, and October 24th. Did we hear correctly?
that's right.
Okay.
Those
Okay,
I
thank
will
you.
not be available for
Right,
those.
so I
Any,
guess I know when the meetings are.
anyone else know of any other dates they will not be here? No, okay.
I'm, the July ones, one of these times I'm supposed to be gone somewhere.
July 11th?
I don't know which one.
Okay, well,
I'll let you know.
we'll circle back.
I'm not here, July 25th, August 8th, or August 22nd.
Okay, so in addition, there's no Deborah. Got that? Copy that.
What was the last one? I'm the same as August 22nd.
It's June 13th, I won't be here.
June 13th.
Let's just take summer off.
Well, it typically happens. And I would encourage all board members, anytime you get an email about a meeting, to please contact Robin and just confirm you're coming or not coming. That way we'll know if we have a quorum. Let's jump down to approval of minutes, since I think we can get rid of that quickly. Are there any corrections or deletions? Martin?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Bauer. On the packet, page 104,
What page are we on?
packet page 104.
Those are the pages on the bottom right-hand corner and left-hand corner. Yep.
Under about the fourth paragraph up where it says Board Member Bernstein, in the middle of that paragraph, it says, "I just didn't want another tree permit on our property." It should be corrected to say, "I just don't want another tree permit," that's right, tree demolition permit. It should be tree demolition permit.
Okay, so fourth paragraph?
That's it's from the bottom, it's one,
from the
2,
bottom.
3, 4, fifth from the bottom,
I
yeah.
got
Fifth from the bottom.
So it should say tree demolition permit. And then on page 106, the first paragraph where it says Board Member McKinnon, and the second line, and Board Member McKinnon, you can corroborate this, says, "And that to make it suitable for modern living, not moderate living." Yeah, okay. And then on same packet, page 106, the second sentence from the bottom, where it says divided lights versus a tree divided light, it should be
True.
versus a true divided light.
Sorry, say which page you're on again?
Packet page 106.
Okay, and the second paragraph from the bottom?
No, the second sentence up from the bottom. A second line from the bottom where it says,
Oh, true divided light.
yeah, it should be a true divided light.
Yeah, I've seen some other errors, so just as we were looking here, so I'll, like
Okay.
overwriting principle, I think it's overwriting,
Oh, yes.
and there's no.
Depends
Okay.
on whether you're writing or writing.
Oh,
Okay.
that's, and also going back to the first paragraph where I was quoted,
What packet page is that?
It's 106.
106, third, line, I think that's the overriding
Yeah, that's what I
principle.
was just saying, is,
Yeah.
yeah, overriding.
Okay.
Yep, and then I also noticed on the same, the 104, Bernstein's paragraph, where we called out about the tree demolition permit. There's a error, just a typo, it needs to say two O's, too close to a tree.
Oh, yes, right. Yes. Thank you.
All right.
So
If,
that was-
any other corrections, deletions, changes? Not seeing any, do I have a motion for approval?
A motion to approve as amended?
Okay, second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Michael will second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None. Okay,
I
so,
don't have a speaker.
oh,
Here, we can share this.
no, I have,
David's got two.
right. All right, so now let's go to oral communications. I see no people here, period, so we can move right beyond that. So we've done official reports, so let's go to study session and start with the retreat items. And let's begin unless there's an interest in having a different order, I think we can just start with the order given, which is comprehensive plan policies and programs related to historic preservation.
There's a card.
No,
not
that's a
speaker
parking,
card,
that's a
Oh,
parking
parking.
card. That's a get out of parking free card. All right, Amy?
Sure, yeah, so, on packet page, packet page 6 starts our report on this retreat. And item 1 is basically just, it's informational. I mentioned it at the last meeting, that we had on February 13th. And,
Yes, you always turn on the mic, because we cannot really
Ah.
hear you. Thank you.
all right, redo.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Good morning, Amy French, Chief Planning Official.
Redo.
We are here for the retreat item. I had prepared a report to kind of cover briefly all 4 items. Just to say, we have a special guest, George Hoyt is coming at 10. Ideally, we could get through items 1, 2, and 4. And then at 10, we have George here to discuss the historic building code. So, regarding item 1, the Planning and Transportation Commission reviewed all of the comprehensive plan policies and where we are in terms of implementation at their meeting. That report, I provided a link in your report for today. The council then had this on their consent calendar, March 4th, to authorize transmittal of the status report on the comp plan to the state. The really important item there is the housing element, and so we have an obligation to send that to the state. I guess there's new requirements to send the entire comprehensive plan, policy implementation update as well. So that's what was done. And so if you want to read more about that, or maybe you have already, the council memo that transmitted all of that with the staff recommendation. So now, packet page 9 and 10, those are the comprehensive plan policies that I pulled out that are regarding preservation. And on the screen here, in the room here, I just showed what this kind of the nomenclature of implementation. So there had been there's kind of a summary here showing that we have routine activities, we have in-progress activities, short-term implementation, and medium-term implementation, and long-term implementation. Correct. I showed this last on February 14th, and here it is again. It's not in your packet. The comp plan policies are in your packet, page 9 and page 10. So those are, so you're aware of the 2030 comp plan, historic preservation related policies. What's on the screen here is a summary of how the staff was transmitting this to communicate where are we in implementing them. So that's what that is nomenclature about that. Okay. So, yeah, so here, for instance, M, the first one, L246, which is exploring the transfer of development right ordinances. So that is a medium signified by the M here, medium, and P stands for, I don't know, pending. Most of these are pending. Some of them are long, some of them are short. So short term being, we're going to do that within the first 5 years. Whereas medium term is 5 to 10 years, and then long term is more than 10 years. So again, the first one, L246, is a medium time frame. Again, 5 to 10 years.
Say, Amy, what does that little symbol mean between the M and P?
Yeah, I
The
think
dollar sign?
that,
Big money.
yeah, I think that was like, do we need resources?
I see.
And how much resources to, hire a consultant,
Thank you.
basically. Get money, allocate funds in the budget. Okay, so that first one is a medium, so 5 to 10 years. I'm just going to go through these because I don't have answers, really. The second one, L4102, is a shorter term, so again, within 5 years, more money, and it's pending, so that's kind of interest. I mean, California Avenue is one of these areas that is frozen in time in the 1950s, but it's interesting. And it's near this Ventura, the Fry's site.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. There's the original Safeway there that was converted to Antonio's Nut House. That is an eligible California Register resource. But there's a lot of one story in CalAv, so it's interesting. Okay, L611, this one is a long term, so again, beyond 10 years. And this is is this Tom who's here? Oh,
Oh, Brandon's here.
Hi.
Good. Join. Welcome.
welcome.
Good morning.
Coffee.
Is there coffee? Okay,
For the record,
cool. Did you,
for
Brandon
the record, Brandon Corey
Brandon has arrived.
has arrived.
thank you.
We're just starting, so.
These are
Sorry.
these are being televised or
Yeah, no,
Recorded.
This is you.
Need a mic.
no
though,
camera.
I guess.
We're sharing.
Oh, there's a
Oh,
camera.
perfect.
Okay. Getting back to the agenda item 1. So L611 was an awards program. So we're considering historic preservation awards as another companion awards to the ARB awards. It so happens that the ARB awards are every 5 years. The last one was 2015. And there were quite a few historic preservation projects, addition projects and such, that and rehab that were on that. The library being a notable one, the Rinconada Library. So it's interesting because we do kind of have an awards program associated with the ARB awards because the kinds of projects that were chosen at least last time had some kind of historic preservation component.
I think we had 3 Palo Alto projects that were recognized by California Preservation Foundation. The library, I'm trying to
True.
remember them. The
Was
library
it the
was
Sea Scout
one.
building, maybe?
Right, Sea Scout building, and there was one other. Well, maybe it'll come to me.
Yeah.
But that was a significant year.
Yeah, where we all went up to San Francisco
Right.
and
Children's
partook of the
Theater?
celebration.
Was it Children's Theater or no?
Oh, maybe it was the College Terrace Library,
Oh, maybe.
which was renovated too. Anyway, so those were 3 projects recognized as
Yes.
historically significant renovations.
So CPF has an awards program. We
Yeah.
benefited from that.
Sure.
We don't have one. One of the things that I get asked by folks out in the community is, gosh, how do we get one of those plaques? Because there is a plaque system, but that's handled by the Palo Alto Historical
Palo Alto
Association.
Stanford
Stanford,
Heritage.
thank you. Passed.
Sorry,
Thank goodness for acronyms. Okay.
I know.
Um,
So, let me interrupt here and
Yeah.
ask, how do you, as the head of planning, envision an awards program being developed? I mean, is that something the board could help with? Is that a subcommittee?
Well, nice to ask about that. We should talk more about that, and a subcommittee sounds like a good idea.
Here's somebody else.
Well, it's a way
Where's
in
George?
which the board could help move this particular project along, especially since we're the Historic Resources Board. And the ARB
Yeah.
is making awards that, in 2015, that maybe we should have considered.
Right, well, I mean, it says long-term here, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
It also says pending, so we can make it more, immediately pending than long-term, especially because 2020 is the next ARB Awards.
Right.
Maybe we consider, like the Olympics, every 5 years, tagging along to that whole thing.
I mean, Past has an interesting program today where they do those plaques and all of the tours. I wonder if there's something interesting we could do jointly with them.
Right, so since I'm on the board of PAST, and Martin is a former board member, I can say that PAST will recognize buildings at their 100-year anniversary. And they separately recognize renovation projects that upgrade really, and preserve historic buildings. Those are, they can be commercial, residential, and they include Stanford buildings. So those buildings are nominated.
What's the frequency of that? Is it
Every year
yearly?
they make awards. I can tell you that we're having some trouble this year. There are only 2 projects that we're considering because there aren't very many projects that have been, that would qualify. Now, we've recognized a number of houses in Professorville that have been renovated, that have really been taken down to the studs and then carefully put back together to resemble what they looked like before. Almost all of them include some kind of addition, but nonetheless, this is an opportunity for PAST to recognize preservation. So anyone on the board that has a suggestion should contact me, because we're looking for any project that would qualify as a renovation, historic renovation. So, Martin, is there anything I've left out of there? Okay.
It seems a good idea to have kind of an ongoing list. I mean, it's certainly something that, projects that come my way that I reach out to Page and Turnbull to help on,
Right.
review of Secretary of Interior Standards compliance. I could be keeping a running list of those and then check in to provide that
Sure.
list to PAST.
That'd be great if you
Yeah,
could.
but is there an interest in maybe 2020 as far as we have the ARB awards, having an HRB awards? Or do we want to have that like the Winter Olympics and have it,
I think 6.1.1.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend that we have, not long-term, but at least medium-term, or maybe short-term. I think long-term is putting it off too far. It's almost like shelving it indefinitely.
Well, it's saying 10, not indefinitely, 10 years. So I'm all for doing something prior to 10 years. Okay.
Maybe you could share the criteria that the ARB uses, just so we could see what that is.
And so I'm not the ARB liaison, but
Well-
I will remind Jody that that's, what because I've always done it. I mean, since 2000, I've been the one that does the ARB awards program, working with the ARB and stuff. So I know very much how it works, and why don't I agendize that for a future HRB meeting as far as sharing
Sure,
that
that'd be-
whole process and brainstorming with the group.
Good idea. Okay.
Okay.
I interrupted. Please
That's-
continue.
The next one is L711, which is, that's a big one, and I don't see what the, short term, maybe that dollar sign is supposed to be an S.
Or it
Let's see.
just requires a lot of money.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Update and maintain the city's historic resource inventory to include historic resources eligible for local, state, and federal listing. Historic resources may consist of a single building or structure or a district. So this is a big one. I guess I'm pausing here as well because of L 7.2, which we'll tap into later. You know, there's been several now, homes that have been determined eligible for California Register through the IR program where somebody wants to come and demo it, and we've found out that it's California Register eligible. So, you know, the next natural step is to look at this policy and say, hey, you know, maybe this belongs in our inventory. And maybe we should update the inventory, but again, that is a consultant cost because that's not happening with just staff. It never has. It's always been an effort with, you know, community members and a consultant and this kind of thing. So, yeah, I'll just keep going.
So we'll explore this in more detail when you
Yes.
get to the next page.
Yes. L 712 is reassess the historic preservation ordinance to ensure its effectiveness. I don't know if those words were chosen well. To remind ourselves of the ineffectiveness of our preservation ordinance and explore how to maybe tweak it. I mean, last time there was a attempt to change the historic preservation ordinance. It did not end well, but maybe there's some that we could have another session to learn about that and what happened and why and what, you know, I mean, it's a scab that I think maybe is healed over at this point, but we can,
As measure G.
yeah, so.
Lessons learned are best
Less,
practices.
yes. So there are folks on this board that know about that and remember it, and some that weren't here and don't remember it. So, you know, it might be of interest to kind of, you know, staff could certainly share old reports, and you could read about it and go, okay, that's why nothing's been done since 1998. Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, I'm
I'd be
gonna,
interested in seeing those at some point. Huh?
I think I got on the board in 1998.
Yeah, you were right there.
Yeah, it was a very divisive election process and not, I think, is misleading as well. And maybe the city is able to reconsider.
well, it is in our comp plan. So we, you know, and it's noted as I think that's an S. So I think it should be coming up fairly soon to put it on our work program, put it that way. It's not on our work program today, other than being in the comp plan. So that's that. I'm going to move on. 712.1 is, I threw this in there because it's interesting, parking exceptions for historic buildings, you know. Because you might have a historic building that wants to change use, let's say, to residential, you know, but it doesn't have the parking. It's in the assessment district. You know, shouldn't we allow it to go to residential?
So it was 7.1.1 long-term?
Long-term, so 712.1 is long-term.
7.11.
The one right.
Oh, you're going
above.
back. I believe that it's an S or a dollar sign. It might be an S.
Might be short-term.
Might be short-term. I'll have to get back to you on that. I didn't write that report. Okay. But we moved past that, and we were on L 7.12.1, and now I'm going to move past that. To the big one.
So let me ask a question about parking.
Okay.
If you're in the downtown parking district, is there some ordinance issue about just staying in there if you're going to switch use? Why wouldn't they just stay in the parking district, even if you're converting? I mean, there's no downtown building that meets the parking requirement except this one, the city hall.
Yeah.
And
So
I don't even know if the city hall would meet it, even though there are 300 spaces here.
technically, in the parking district, it's a blended rate of 1 per 250, and 1 space for every 250 square feet. So that applies to all the commercial type uses, every kind of commercial use you can imagine. I think with residential, we've looked at, because residential, you're supposed to provide some parking spaces, but,
Yeah,
I
one
think,
covered, one uncovered.
yeah, but in the downtown, there's, because it's multifamily is all you can do here. You can't do a single-family
Right.
home.
Although there are some buildings that could be converted to single-family homes that still exist in the downtown area. Few, but some.
Right, but I don't think we would allow that because we're looking at multifamily. So there's, with all the housing ordinances and support for affordable housing, this kind of thing, there's definitely a push, and it's being looked at as far as, parking requirements.
So on the projects that get built downtown, they don't actually provide the one parking space for every 250 square feet.
Yeah, new projects or, it's complicated, but there's the parking in lieu fees that you can pay into
Right.
the parking district for spaces not provided. But certainly there's a limitation because we have grandfathered, structures, and that if they want to add housing on top of commercial, they can do that. But, where are they going to put the parking? So I guess that's something that in the past, that parking in lieu has been used for commercial parking.
Only, but is there any
Yeah.
prohibition from using it in a residential circumstance like you just described?
Yeah, I don't know, I can research that. I think it's being looked at right now with ordinance changes to clarify that, because it's either silent or it says commercial or something. So, the code, when I say it. the
Yeah,
code.
yeah, right, okay.
But the requirements would be different, right? So the residential versus commercial.
Well,
Yeah.
regardless of what the requirement is, the fact that they're in a district that can't provide parking,
Right, yeah, that's
why that's why there's a
Yeah.
district, and there is a mechanism in place that deals with commercial buildings, which actually have a much greater parking requirement than
Than residential.
residential.
Yes.
Yes.
So it seems to me that residential ought to be able to fit into that same program using the appropriate residential requirements. I don't know why it wouldn't, especially, I don't know why we would not have that as part of the program,
Okay.
especially because we're anxious as a city to provide as much housing as we can.
Sounds like a topic for another meeting,
Okay?
to learn about in lieu parking and its relevance for single family, just as a general topic. Okay, so here we are, 7.2. This is the one I can say that I'm familiar with because I'm in charge of catching these. Later on, I had provided in the packet, let's see, packet pages. So this is on the outreach item 4. This is packet page 71 is the presentation I did to Silvar, which is the Silicon Valley Association of Realtors. So I had done by their request, I had entertained them for 45 minutes, and including this policy 7.2 and what we're doing. And so what we're doing is to, when somebody comes in for an individual review, which is a 2-story home meeting, a preliminary meeting, I will go to those and I will communicate that we need to study the property by our consultants with their money to see if it's California Register eligible or not. If they plan to tear it down and it comes back California Register eligible, we have an issue. If it comes back and it's not, we don't have an issue. They can tear it down because the comp plan policy does not say anything about local, eligibility. It's just all about California Register eligibility, and that's because of CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. Once it becomes a CEQA resource, in other words, eligible for California Register listing, it becomes a CEQA resource, and we have to care that it not be torn down. And so,
Well, it has to go through a CEQA review.
yeah, so technically it's not exempt from CEQA. Normally we would exempt single-family homes from CEQA. But in the case of, they're gonna tear down a California Register eligible home, it becomes a CEQA problem. So the good news is we've had some of these have walked away from demos because of this. And then the other good news is because we've gotten a nice report prepared, a historic resource evaluation, now the modifications to the building have a very robust report that we know what the character defining features are, et cetera, whereas we didn't prior to that. So that's the good news, and you know, I've got a running list of those projects we've evaluated and have come back. The question is, you know, once our consultant determines it's eligible, you know, what's the process? It's not spelled out here. But we definitely have to look and make sure we know what's going on. You know, if somebody wants to demo it still, even though it's California Register, there is a process to move forward on that, but it hasn't been spelled out in this policy. So, I don't know, I'll keep going. L781 is promote and expand the available incentives for the retention and rehabilitation of buildings with historic merit in all zones, and revise existing zoning and permit regulations to minimize constraints to adaptive reuse. So that's a medium-term implementation, so 5 to 10 years.
So let me ask, what would be a constraint to adaptive reuse that you could?
Well, for instance, you know, let's say the building's chopped up inside with lots of little walls, and they want to remove walls and make it a big, you know, restaurant. You know, I don't know, is that a constraint? Is there some structural issues? Yeah, that's a structural thing, but then are there other constraints such as, well, now they need a dumpster, you know, place to put the dumpster. We require new buildings at least to have a trash be covered up and enclosed. In the downtown.
So that's sort of a permit. So the dumpster issue is a permit restriction.
Yeah.
For zoning, might mean a change of use. So the one I can think of that would trigger the most complications is moving from commercial to residential.
Sure, yeah, that's
That's,
of interest.
yeah, so.
So what are they, so for instance, yeah, there's no parking, and now they want to go and, what, do they need to provide the parking, so.
Right. Okay, so just wanted to put some context in there.
I imagine that this one will, at some point be on our work program to look at because it says zoning, so, you know, zoning ordinance. We do annual zoning ordinance updates, and so, you know, this could make it onto one of those.
So let me interrupt again. I think it's in the California Historic Building Code section of our packet. I think there was a list of incentives that the city offers, although now that I'm trying to find it, I won't be able to. But I think one of the incentives was expedited permit review. Another one was there's a floor area, and it's not necessarily the California Historic Building Code, but just the city's incentives for historic preservation. There's a 250 square foot
Oh, yeah,
bonus.
through the HIE program, home improvement
Right.
exception.
And there are a couple of other things
Yep.
that,
The basement thing where you can have your finished
Right.
floor higher than 3 feet.
right, which is significant. Okay, so there are ways in which we can mitigate some of these constraints by designating these buildings as historic resources or put them on our inventory. And one of the questions I had about this particular paragraph and the one above, L7.2, is how complicated is the process for getting on Palo Alto's historic inventory?
That sounds like another topic for another meeting, getting onto the inventory, a discussion. Like, how is that done?
There is, I'm asking these questions because I think when we get to 4 and outreach to our community, these are things that we need to have at hand, ready at hand, articulated, so you can say, so this is a list of things that will, you can use as a property owner to move your project forward and take advantage of benefits. Anyway, okay,
All right, so we're, second to last one, L782 is create incentives to encourage salvage and reuse of discarded historic building materials. So we do have a C&D debris, demolition debris diversion program. And I know this because I'm over code enforcement, and when people don't do it, they have to pay fines and such.
Is there a facility to gather historic material that may be considered to be capable of being reused? Is the city involved with any type of storage or outlet?
I don't know if we have an involvement in that or not.
It's not a city, I'm 7 years away from this, because I haven't done this for a long time, but there were a couple of local groups. The city 10 years ago provided us with a list as a contractor of organizations that would come pick up or would accept things like interior doors that matched a certain age, like say the 20s building materials, or windows, double-hung windows were particularly popular. They liked to get those. But they would also take aluminum windows, they'd take vinyl windows. They'd take lots of parts, any light fixture, that came out of the building. They even take some appliances. So you go through and kind of strip the house of the things that you could, that these companies would take, and that puts them back into the stream. Takes it out of the waste stream and puts it into a reuse stream.
Well, I mean, there used to be the person in East Palo Alto, Paul Gardner, I think he used to have
Yeah.
potential salvage, but I think he went out of business, but that was a very useful.
I've actually been in contact with him recently, and he hasn't gone out of business. The cost of doing his business in East Palo Alto prevented him from remaining there, but he does hold the whole house salvage service. If someone's going to demolish the house, he can go in and hold a whole house salvage sale.
I mean, it would be great if the city was, could integrate some of their resources and maybe supporting a facility where private persons can operate that type of reuse facility. The big problem is they can't afford a place to store their material.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think Palo
Nor
Alto
can the
is too
city. I mean,
expensive.
the city can't.
There is
organize
Habitat for
something.
Humanity in Redwood City, I know, because I've taken
Yeah.
stuff there.
There's
and I
several
see stuff there.
locations
Yeah,
there,
so-
yeah.
What was the place, something freight and salvage in Berkeley, Oakland, right on the border?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe one.
Omega.
Maybe that
Omega
was it.
has- Omega
Yeah,
does the
Omega
architectural
and
stuff.
iron
and then
ore.
there's-
Yeah.
Yeah, Urban Ore. It takes
Urban
like
Ore,
an- Yeah,
Urban
it
Ore.
takes like anything.
Right.
They're more anything, and Omega's more early,
More
early
antique
20th
type.
century, or, yeah.
So the,
But Pa-
yeah,
Paul also has, I was gonna say, the resource where, he has like a newsletter he sends out, and he does do like multi-week things at those houses that get stripped. So you can, but again, you don't have the storage, but he will offer like an initial thing, and then, just the on-site stuff there, so that still does happen.
I've used his stuff, Years ago.
one of the most astounding things that was recycled from projects I did was the original hardwood floor material. And that takes a lot of work, but people wanted it, so.
I guess my point is I'm trying to direct you to maybe take an interest in sponsoring some type of facility or partnering with somebody to provide the physical place where they can conduct this type of operation. Otherwise, it's just words if you don't do something. You say, do it, let's take some action possible.
need to put your microphone on when you're speaking?
Yeah.
All right.
If we could, somehow the city could get more involved with partnering with some of these people, providing the facility or the means maybe to engage in reuse. Maybe it's a little bit out of the comfort zone for the city.
It's out of my,
But,
what I am overseeing, but thank you for your suggestion.
I don't
No,
know,
I-
does everybody else feel?
Yeah, no, I mean, I like the same idea if the city actually had space, because I think there are resources like Paul who actually are willing to go and do this. The problem is, as Margaret mentioned, is I
We
think
get
it's just
pushback.
cost prohibitive now,
I feel like
right?
you're pushing back a little bit, but.
Well,
Well,
it's
I
not
th-
within my purview to.
I think unfortunately, it's a business. It's a business model that someone has to prove that it's worth doing, and he's tried it. Several people have tried it, and it's not a money-making endeavor. And so people are only willing to
Sounds like a
do
public-private
failing
partnership.
businesses for so long.
That's why.
Well,
I-
but I mean, I think the
I
fact that they have many of these that still survive outside of this area. So the
Yes,
problem is the
true.
business model doesn't work when, you know,
When the real
when
estate's so
commercial's
high.
$250 a
Yeah.
square foot, but it, you know, and versus where it does in many other areas. So it's just the costs are so high, particularly here. So I mean, I like Mike said, like if we actually had some underutilized resource of the cities from a space perspective.
saying,
I mean, I'm not saying
Like
we do,
Cubberley or
but
something, you know.
yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, from a reuse perspective, it is interesting, so.
Sounds like somebody might want to look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, 783, seek additional innovative ways to apply current codes and ordinances to older buildings, use state historical building code. And so we have that on our agenda today, so we don't need to really talk about that because we have that as an agenda item. So one thing I was thinking is we're set up really here like as if there's people here. If we want to take a break maybe at 9:30 and consider reordering ourselves into a more conducive physical layout of people, we could all kind of move to that end of the table maybe. And,
Or some of us can just move over there.
yeah, right?
Yeah, I mean,
That's what I'm saying. Maybe all of us can go sit over there at an appropriate time to facilitate
that's fine.
face-to-face.
so,
just my face.
You don't feel comfortable just sitting there across from us all, Amy?
I don't want to be the star of the show.
we're the judge.
We like it like it is now. We don't want to move.
Classroom.
Yeah,
You've done very well on your report today, Amy.
thank you, thank you.
So are there
accept
any,
a B plus.
so I think we've, so you've gone over the
I've done that.
comp plan issues. Are there any other comments from board members or any suggestions or additional things we ought to consider?
One of the themes that was touched on in a couple of these points is that incentive program, which we still haven't, I think, mastered. I know that we've talked about the Mills Act is the most obvious incentive program that comes to mind, and we've tried to make some progress on that. I don't know if there's any smaller, lower level incentives, like, you know, expediting approval processes, reducing, you know, the application fees. I'm just trying to think, like, the person who's gonna be most impacted by these programs is a person who owns a house in Professorville, who has a historically sensitive property and they want to do something to it. Those are the people who probably would be most interested in some kind of ease of the process. If we could just ease up on the process, maybe if their property isn't, you know, Mills Act worthy, but I think I see that as an achievable incentive, just to make it easy for these homeowners to go through the process. But I don't know.
I'm uploading the city's webpage.
I don't know how to quantify that or,
Let's have a look. Our web pages, if you, and this kind of bleeds over into, and we could start, I guess, talking about that if you want, the outreach. You know, what's our current web page looking like? Do we adequately convey the incentives? And so we do. So if you haven't seen the web pages in a while, you should have a look and see how we are conveying. I don't know why this is so big. I can't. Okay. So I was going to go ahead and open that up. So on the topic of incentives, here we go. See, areas of work. We have all of this going on here.
Oh, there it is, preservation.
Preservation incentives, So, I mean, I'm pretty proud of our web pages for historic preservation. I think Emily did a good job on this, and then the citywide did a redo of web pages. So I'm going to go ahead and get us there. This is really big. Okay, so here we have the Palo Alto Municipal Codes. It talks about the standards and the Historic Building Code prominently there. And it does say, which applies to all resources designated at local, state, and federal levels. So we already are telling people about that. And then we say, you know, here we go, and you scroll down, there's the building code.
Oh, there it is, wait,
Yeah.
incentives.
This is on the incentives page, Palo Alto Building Code, Chapter 16. I don't know why this is so large. Okay, so this is what we're telling folks on our web pages. So there's that about the building code. Then we have the municipal code. It has all of the parts of the municipal code that have incentives. So now,
That's right. This is what I found yesterday, printed off and left at home.
oh, well, here it is
How
again.
convenient.
So we are announcing to the world, if they choose to look on our web pages, what our incentives are. You know, we go over this subdivision incentives, the basements, the attics. We have the 200 and,
50
oh, shoot, that needs to be changed, because we changed that this last year. So I'm looking at this one here where my cursor is, sections. So because the HRB brought this up, we put it into the code change last year. And so in 2018, this changed. So it is available for categories 3 and 4 buildings. So that, I'm going to make sure that that gets changed today. I didn't realize that, well, Emily left, so she was updating the web pages before. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to go through and make sure that these are all current with our codes. But we definitely are, oh, here's another one. Allowed to transfer, I think that might still be the case. For transfer of development rights, it's still only available for categories 1 and 2. So, for instance, we have a project at the Toy World, I believe, and they want to graduate to category 2 from category 3, so that they can take advantage of transferable development rights. They are in the downtown and the parking district, so, this is an incentive for that project.
Is this in our packet right here?
No, this is
No,
not.
I'm looking online, this is the city's webpage, so, because Margaret brought up why, you know, how are we letting the world know about our incentives, and this is how we're letting them know. I mean, that's the limit of it, it's on a webpage, so if people find the, you know, how are we directing people to the webpage to learn about all these? That's a question, as far as how well are we doing with that? Yeah, so, did you want to?
I do think, I mean, I have looked at the webpage, and I do think, like, for instance, that bulletin that we did about 2 years ago, I think that's very effective and explanatory to just the general public on where their property might fall in terms of their status. I thought that was really remarkably well done.
Well, and actually, that needs to be updated too, since the event of 7.2 policy.
But I think it was just such a great document. I think it was very
Two-page, yeah.
helpful, yeah. So, and it's great to update it, obviously.
Okay, anything else before we move on to item 2, the mid-century modern context?
No, I don't think so. I don't see anything.
Amy?
Yes.
On on the slide where it says South Sofa Phase 1 bonus floor area, does it scroll down, does it say what bonus floor area, how much square footage, how much bonus floor area is provided?
No, it just tells you these are the types of incentives. So you have to go kind of look at that
Okay, thank you,
document.
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, web pages ideally have more things you can click on.
I understand, right.
Active
Thank you.
hyperlinks, so,
Thank
you know, that would be an improvement we could take on. And now I'm looking here on the, do we have the most recent? I think this might be from the old comp plan, these policies on the webpage. So it's good that we're looking at the webpage, because this may indicate a need to update. Yeah, so I'm gonna check that as well. I don't see the comp plan policies we just looked at on our webpage. I'm seeing different ones here, which I think might be the old ones.
Also, I think the federal tax incentive credit has changed since this,
Ah,
the 2017 tax law.
okay. Where did?
Rather, well, we're, no,
Did you see
down,
that on
no,
here?
go down.
Okay,
We just hit the below subdivision.
okay.
Yeah, so I don't know what that says because I couldn't see it, but just triggered
Yeah,
the California Preservation Foundation had sent out a email to,
Oh, look, we do have the 2030 comp plan, so, at least. And then we have Cal Building Code, incentives programs. I don't know.
Yeah, I was looking at
What
this
is
portion of our particular portion of the city's website, and for the first time, it was
Dennis
quite
Bachman.
easy to navigate.
Interesting. Here's something I didn't know.
Well, that's
that-
very old.
Edited, yeah, this is awkward. Wow. I should go mining art. Well, this is an idea for a subcommittee, if anyone wants to be on a subcommittee, to look at the web pages and, see is there something broken or that needs enhancement, resolution. I'm all for having help in that way. Yeah.
The problem with doing that, Amy, at least from my perspective as a board member, is a lot of this stuff I have no understanding of. I mean, I can read it, but I don't know whether it's accurate because I wouldn't know what the current status is. You're probably the only person in the city that could look at this.
So, it's beneficial to have, I wouldn't call any of you lay people when it comes to historic preservation, but certainly from a standpoint of, let me look at this for the first time and see if I understand this and see, wow, look at this, what's this thing that says Dennis Backlund on it? That's the kind of feedback that would be helpful, and there could be a list of things to fix, So I welcome input and help.
You want an editor.
Yeah, I'm not taking this project on tomorrow or the next day, so.
Or
if
actually,
anyone-
what you're looking for is a reviewer.
Yes, somebody who is interested in quality control, because clearly, it's staffing vacancies is a problem. Okay. I think we need to move on to item 2, if you don't mind. Would
Yeah,
you like to
let's.
do the fire drill and?
Well, why don't we break
reseat?
right before 10, say maybe 10 to 10, and then
Okay.
we'll then immediately move to the California Building Code when,
Okay, I just thought maybe for the.
yeah, we'll do that before. at a
Mid-century
break.
modern, you might want to have a conversation, but, with face-to-face, but that's okay, it's up to you. Okay, here it is. The mid-century modern context statement has been, prepared by 2 staff members, over the several years and never submitted. It needs council authorization to do something like this, because it relates to budget and whether staff is going to be able to commit their time to doing that, as well as get a consultant, and it's got to be on a work program. So it's not on a work program, and May is fast approaching. By the way, I had hoped to hire a historic planner. This is the second time that I've gotten to final interviews and.
Offers?
I don't want to say more because we're still in the process, but it's been very difficult, and we still don't have a historic planner, I'll just say that. So,
You're getting closer.
Not clear.
it feels like we get closer, and then we're just as far away as we ever had been. So, we're still in the situation with, since March of last year, with,
That's when
Using consultants.
Emily left March of
March 1st.
2018,
yes,
How's it been, a year?
a year.
been a year, over a year.
Can you say more?
And don't I know it?
Debbie?
Amy, can you say more broadly, is it about the cost of living here fundamentally?
Well, I'm sure
or-
that's a lot of it, because we do try to recruit people that have qualifications, and they usually are not living right here in the Bay Area, so. The ones that apply, because they see the price, they see the salary, and they think, ooh, that's a nice salary. And then, once they start looking.
And then they see the $17,000 a month rent for a house. So a house advertised for $17,000 a month. 4 bedrooms, so there's a lot of room. You could put about 20 people in it. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. So we're now on page 11 of the packet.
Yes,
And I read, let me just say, Amy, I read through this. It seems to me like this particular grant application is ready to go if the dates change and if the funds it's page 11 through 17 in our packet, actually 19 in the packet. I don't know whether on page 18, these are all current costs.
Yeah, this would have been done, starting with Matt and
Yeah,
finishing
I
with Emily,
remember,
so,
right.
it's, yeah, so this reflects a past year, so I don't know how much we would, in today's dollars, we would have to request.
So the federal funds, grants, are those still, are the two matching, or the grant from Fed grant of 45,000, maybe 40, it says here, and then the CLG's matching 30,000 share. It seems to me the work has all been done, and what we ought to be doing is updating this and encouraging the council to move it forward. For next year, I don't see that it happens this year. Isn't the deadline like the end of
Oh.
March?
But, it's May, but that's still too
That's
fast.
yeah,
And again, no historic planner,
right.
we have staffing problems in our planning department.
Well, so maybe we could get an estimate from a consultant to see how much they would charge to be the planner. I don't think we want to wait until we have a planner, considering that it's been so difficult to find one. I mean, you're in the second or third round of interviews?
Well, this is the second time we've gone out and tried to get somebody.
Right.
So,
And lots of people interviewed, and you get right down to the end, and then you can't
it's tough.
close the deal.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. So the basic work, though, has been done here. And we ought to be harvesting that work.
Okay, well, so I hear that as as an encouragement to shoot for 2020. Again, I would have to work with the director, John Late, regarding our work program, and but I will let him know that at least a few of you are thinking it's a good idea to. Would you like to do any kind of straw poll? What do you call that?
Well, it's a sense of the board.
A sense. There you go.
I'm assuming from comments that I'm hearing that all of us support this. Is that accurate? Martin? Yeah,
Well, it kind of sounds like the new normal is we're not going to have a historic preservation planner.
well, I think there's a chance we won't because of the cost of housing. It's a good salary until you have to live here.
So what's the alternative? You go to a contractor to do it.
Well, right.
Well, we are,
Which is what we're doing now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Page and Turnbull is our professional support
Yeah.
for this program, so.
Right, and Page and Turnbull did both the Professorville Design Guidelines and the Eichler Design Guidelines, and they are very thorough, very competent, and they're easy to work with, at least in my experience on those two projects. And this might not require a lot of their time.
Right.
So I would encourage you to explore with them.
Yeah, I can ask them to give an estimate
Right.
and share that with John.
Yeah.
Probably have to know how many meetings there are a year, which is pretty random, so.
So we're talking right now about the
Just
mid-century
about the
modern context
mid-century thing.
statement, yeah.
Right, so there is a, in this proposal, there is an estimate of what the time requirement will be. Somebody has gone through, I think Matt did this when he was the preservation planner.
Well, and Emily updated it because it does have,
The red?
the hope here was May, June 2019.
Right.
Yeah, I think your only alternative is a contract to planner.
Yeah, I know.
Well, it's the application, you have to apply for the grants, and that's
Yeah.
what the council has to approve.
Right, the council has to approve that, the budget for the consultant and the budget or the allocation of staff resources in kind
Yeah, well,
for staff to devote themselves to this. And that's where it gets hard too, because again, who's sitting in the chair?
sure.
Well, it also, under number 3, administration, it's asking, part of what they're asking is, who are the professionals who are gonna take on this task?
It's page 15.
And Emily's name is still
Yeah.
listed here.
No, because
so-
I haven't updated this since
Right,
she
right.
worked on it.
But, I mean,
Yeah, we don't-
when it's updated, I think the part of achieving the grant is to prove that you have people who are actively involved with it.
Yeah.
I guess you could say you could list the HRB in this category. I don't know.
I don't know. This is why we're not going
kinda
after it this
tricky.
year. One of the reasons to not go
It's
after
really
it this year.
tricky,
Because
yeah.
we do need to
it's a
have
challenge.
live bodies that are qualified.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'd also like to point out that what every board member knows, and that is that a mid-century inventory would include nearly half of Palo Alto's residential housing, because the 1940 to 1970, is that what this is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, prior to 1940, there was virtually nothing south of what we now know as Oregon. There wasn't even Oregon. That was developed in the 60s. And all the Eichler houses, 25 to 2,700 residences, would qualify for this. And they were all built in that, really in a much narrower timeframe.
Post-World War II.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a really significant portion of our residential building structures, and it seems to me we have an obligation to look at this and get it inventoried.
Well, so, yeah, inventory being, so normally the nomenclature would be more like register, the local register. We call ours inventory. You know, I mean, Dames and Moore did a survey that's, you know, but those didn't make it onto our inventory or register.
Right, so this is a list of the
Yeah.
historic inventory. It's on the website, easily found. It's every building, and this is from Danes and Moore's 1998 to 2000, I think.
No, that's from 1970s.
70s?
That's the inventory, because the Dames and Moore, all of those, they never made it on our inventory. They were filed with the state
Right.
as eligible
Right.
for California.
This is 10 pages of buildings by address,
Yeah.
both residential and commercial.
Yeah,
So,
so that's from 1978, and those are the two-page historic resource evaluations that don't say all that much. But anyways, this would be a context statement, so it's not exactly an inventory that goes out and puts addresses on a list. It's not the same thing as that. It's just
a sense of,
a sense of what's important.
Right. in this.
Yeah.
Okay. Other board members have comments? Margaret?
Do we ever look at and see what other cities are doing in these efforts? I mean, I know that oftentimes I'll see stuff from like San Jose or Redwood City. I mean, it's not a bad idea to see what other people are doing. Do we ever try to look and see? I mean, who else is making these great efforts?
Emily might have known. I haven't researched it myself.
I mean, that might be another thing if we're all like kind of looking for things to do in our
Oh,
free
yeah,
time.
right.
I mean,
You're
I
not
always,
having to show up twice a month for meetings.
I always like because I go to different cities. I do projects in various different cities. So when I'm walking through, I'll see something, historic preservation in Redwood City. I have like collected pamphlets and things like that because I think that's interesting. But I mean, maybe that's another thing I guess that we could just see that, like, gee, what kind of efforts are other people doing?
Isn't
Might
this
be kinda
something that
interesting.
you can ask Page and Turnbull? I mean, they probably
must know.
already have contracts that they've executed for
Sure.
mid-century modern context statements.
Sure, I mean, once we get into the, I'm authorized to spend my time researching for this, put it on the work program as we want it. So I'll have a conversation with John and, I could, if I'm authorized to move ahead and ask people for things, I can ask that. I mean, yes, that's normally a part of a consultant's job when they're doing something for a city, is to benchmark. Certainly, if they've been the consultant that's helped another city, they wouldn't have to do a lot of benchmarking because they've already had the experience. So.
It also just seems like, I mean, let's not overburden ourselves, I think. I mean, we don't have the staff because we're not because we don't want the staff, we're trying to recruit staff to assist in these programs, but until we have those people in place, I think we can only be hopeful to move these things along, but to really execute it, I think we need to have the professionals to assist us in doing so. I just think some of these things, like, we will keep adding things to our list of already full list of work
I mean,
tasks.
The
I mean,
already overflowing
I
list.
know what that feels like, just, it's just overwhelming.
Isn't that the modern day workplace?
Yeah, that's true, and living in this area,
It's a 24/7 job.
we're all workaholics, so we just want to work around the clock, but I don't know.
So let's maybe make an appointment, you and I meet with Jonathan and see if we can move this forward. I would like to point out that the pictures, these are great pictures that you've used to accompany this. The one that I was looking for was the City Hall building, which,
It's the city
this
hall
building.
Oh, yes, Edward
Oh, yeah.
Ralston.
Yeah, I
She
mean,
used to have before
Right,
there were blue
yes.
trees.
right,
Or any colored trees.
yeah, right.
It was,
It was beautiful awnings that were so dangerous they had to take them down because they weren't built to spec and they weren't engineered. It was really sad because I think they were quite dramatic. But this building itself still will qualify, is my understanding, even though it doesn't have the original canopies that were out here.
And this is not the only one of its kind. I guess Edward Ralston built a couple of these city halls across the country.
Oh, yeah, Stone was very well known.
Yeah, I mean,
Right, so another city hall just like this in Ohio.
really. So he also was the architect for the original Stanford Hospital,
Yes.
which is sadly going away someday. But
Soon.
it's the last building in the sequence of 3 million square feet of buildings, new buildings.
Edward Ralston.
Yeah, he designed the hospital, which can't be
Did something
saved.
in New York, too.
So definitely, some of these are, I have a book that shows mid-century modern and this Methodist church where my parents met.
I'm gonna cut these out.
This,
Really?
little anecdote. Yeah, there's a story there. This is in that book of notable mid-century concrete formed. I mean, that was the big deal, right? The concrete
Yeah,
forming of shapes.
and I like the 440 California Avenue thing, the Bank of the West. I don't know I don't know what the bank is now, but
Oh, right.
it was very interesting.
It's still Bank of the West.
Is it still?
Yeah.
That tree in front of this picture now is a giant tree.
Yeah.
Oh, Amy, we're gonna remind you to change.
Sorry.
Okay,
You're driving her crazy.
so maybe this is unless we have other things to discuss on this, maybe it's a good time to take a break and
Yeah.
come back at 10 for
Yes.
What?
talk with our building inspector. We'll take a break.
And rearrange our chairs?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No, not yet. You're not paroled yet.
Okay.
So let's be
Break.
back in 10 minutes.
welcome back. I know you're the chair, so you can.
No, I'm just welcoming you, and we're very appreciative of your spending time with us and talking to us about the historic code, the California Historic Building Code, which is, of course, of primary interest to us because we're in the business of, as a board, of trying to protect historic properties. So, Amy, you want to?
I'll tee it up.
Tee it up?
Packet page 23 is the Historical Building Code. And then, of course, to introduce the item on packet page 7, I had reached out to Page and Turnbull, our historic consultants, who had, talked with their colleagues, et cetera, and confirmed that it's, up to each jurisdiction as to decide whether a building is considered qualified. But certainly on our website, as we saw this morning with the incentives, and as is noted here, it can be that they're on the city or county registers or inventories to qualify. It doesn't have to be national or California register. Other buildings can meet the standards for use of historic building code. So, but here's George. I did provide a note as well in the report from what George had sent, and provided these copies here if we want to get into the depths of the codes.
So what page are we starting?
23, page 23.
That's the code itself.
Yeah, just one thing here, we've included the whole California Historical Building Code in this binder here. So it's not very large, and how it's kind of broken down into is different sections that would apply to different sections of the building code standards. So there's an egress portion, there is administrative, use and occupancies, fire protection, means of egress, structural accessibility, mechanical plumbing, and that sort of thing. The last chapter kind of goes back into some of the qualifications of the requirements. And basically, when we come across a building that an applicant is utilizing the historical building code, we look at this as our guidance document to see where potentially some leniency could be given to existing components in the building, and look at it for guidance if we need to take some consideration into some existing structures that really can be altered if we're utilizing a building. And through past experiences as the building official for almost 5 years now, I've had an opportunity to work on a couple of historical projects, one being across the street, what used to be known as University Arts. We applied the historical building code to that. And for one instance, like the main exterior open stairs in that building go throughout the building, well, current in the code that would not be allowed, but we did allow it through the historical building code because they upgraded into a sprinkler system, plus they also did a pretty aggressive seismic retrofit on there. So it's kind of the historical building code gives us that latitude to balance the good with the bad, so to speak, and try to provide the best product at the end of the day that allows us to maintain some historical resources in the city. So I'm available to answer any direct questions you might have regarding the historical building code, or whatever.
Just from a liability.
Martin, your mic.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. Liability, what does the state of California offer any chief building official? Let's just say that you approve a change. Let's just say if there becomes a safety, someone gets hurt during a building, and then say litigation happens, say, look, this doesn't meet current building code. Does the state of California offer protection from your decisions? Do you know? No.
I don't know if they actually offer protection.
And just a question.
I think we are, we're responsible for the decisions that we make. And we try our best to document
Sure.
the processes and the benefits.
Yeah.
So on and so forth. We never want to have an unsafe condition
Of course,
out there.
sure, yeah.
And as long as we've duly documented that we've increased the life safety of the building,
Yeah.
historically, departments have been in pretty good shape.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's just a comfort level,
Yeah.
because you're making it, it's your decision, you know?
It is
And then what's your comfort level?
And I've
Yeah,
had,
yeah.
I've had conversations with the state regarding that.
Okay, yeah,
And
yeah.
ideally with university arts.
Yeah,
building.
that's right,
And, you know, we balance the positives and negatives
yeah.
of doing that, and we really think we have a superior life safety building, making
Yeah,
it
yeah.
seismically safe and adding sprinklers that would
Yeah.
extinguish any fire.
Yeah, it's not like the, as long as things are documented, then that
Yeah, as long
becomes,
as things are
say,
properly
here's the basis
documented.
of our decision, yeah.
And these are the basis of our
Yeah,
decisions.
yeah, good, yeah, thanks.
So, George, I'm interested in the current status on fire sprinkler systems. I think the law has changed now so that almost any reconstruction would trigger a sprinkler system in a building. Is that an accurate? I mean, it's over,
I'd have to look at our.
it was over
ordinance.
50%.
Yeah, it's pretty aggressive at this point.
Right.
The 2016 California Building Code. If you're doing a remodel in an existing space that doesn't have sprinklers, there's a good chance that space would require sprinklers.
All right, okay, and the California Historic, I read the fire portion, it clearly talks about sprinkler systems, and so there's no avoiding them in an historic building. Yeah, okay, well, and I have to say, I also like to say that on my daughter's 1907 building in San Mateo, as I've said board before, we managed to put a sprinkler system in without any interruption, without any invasive work on an elaborate first floor, box beam ceilings. We did it all in attic spaces and things, and it was, yeah, we were able to cover the whole house and not have to tear the whole house apart, so
Yeah,
it's a good
just
thing.
to follow up on that, I know when I was involved with adaptive reuse of the buildings at Moffett Field, invariably, we'd have to go in and sprinkler them, and that would buy us a lot of latitude as far as doing other things we want to do. That seemed to satisfy a lot of the requirements once we sprinklered. But we sprinklered just about all those buildings.
Yeah, my experience working with life safety engineers, they do rely on sprinkler systems and the performance of the sprinkler system and alarm systems in buildings that do not have them.
Yeah. I had one other
Safe building.
question. I know there's a thing called soft structures that we attended a seminar in San Francisco, I think you were at it,
Yeah,
where if you have like a
the
garage below a
first
building.
floor soft structures.
Yeah.
Soft story structure?
Yeah,
Seismic
right,
camera?
where, the first floor is basically all windows and garage doors.
Yeah, big openings for garage,
It was like 2555 Park, yeah.
yeah. Do you have anything you wanted to convey with us as far as what your experience is at, or what the current program is? I know there's new legislation, I think, that when it's going into effect, that you have to seismically upgrade these soft structures.
I'm not sure if there's legislation, I'm not currently aware of legislation at the state level in regards to that. I know we are exploring some local regulation, and there's a lot of other cities, such as Los Angeles and San Francisco, that
Yeah.
have a very aggressive soft story
Right.
structure program.
Yeah,
I think Oakland has recently launched a new one. That is something that PCE and Development Services is looking into. We did do a very comprehensive seismic hazard mitigation study a few years ago. They had some recommendations. Currently, soft story structures are not on our seismic hazardous list. However, we do have a primary inventory of them, and we always encourage the seismic retrofit of them, but we are considering the options and will be coming forward with a proposal in the near future.
we don't have very many buildings in Palo Alto that have soft,
Soft story, I think there's around 300 or so.
300, well,
That's
that's,
a lot.
It's quite a few, more than you think.
yeah.
And the era of construction is the 50s through the 70s, is that?
A lot of them are multifamily buildings.
Yeah, right.
Because, they had garages.
Garages, yeah.
carports
Yep.
underneath there.
Yeah, ground floors, I can think of them. San Francisco has a very aggressive program right now, and that's because of the Loma Prieta earthquake damage in the marina.
So do require the seismically upgraded these buildings in San Francisco?
Put these moment frames on the garage.
Right, so it's complicated and depends on what you want to do, but pretty much any time you come in for a building permit, they'll look at that, and they're very aggressive about tying any change to to some kind of mitigation of those soft-story buildings. Which is, I think, a good thing, actually. They're the worst building department I ever worked with in my life.
I have great experience with them. I love them.
Well, I have good experiences with their with their inspectors. It's just the permit process is nuts. Anyway, other questions?
I have a
Margaret.
quick question, but I don't have a microphone, so I'm going to borrow yours. Because I want everyone to hear me. No, I'm kidding. I just wanted you to speak briefly about how, because the historic building code applies, it's interpreted per each jurisdiction. So how do you evaluate a project and say, yes, the building code applies to this structure, and no, it doesn't? And then, for instance, I do a lot of residential projects. So how would you view a project to determine whether the historic building code would apply? And then what if this part of the project was to remodel an existing historic structure, but then there's an addition to it? I'm guessing that the historic building code would apply to the remodel, but the new part of the structure would need to follow the current building code. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, I mean.
Or assumption, I guess I
that
should
would
say.
be. So let's start off with how I would establish a project would be, or the historical building code would be utilized on a project. Really dependent on the applicant coming in and requesting such, and has done their due diligence and figure out how they want to apply it. First thing, if we come across a situation, our staff comes across a situation where they want to utilize it, then we look to see if the project qualifies for it to be utilized. And we would look at a national registry, we would look at a state level registry, we would look at a local and confirm with our planning department that it's on that, and then take a look at the existing resources of that. Ideally, especially in commercial buildings, it's ideal for us to identify what the historical fabrics and components of the building are that we are trying to maintain, and how we're going to utilize the historical building code to do that and work around those obstacles. So we would utilize that. We would really rely on a third-party historical plan person who's evaluating the building to establish what those important components are, if it be the exterior features or some of the interior features, and document that and try to work with that on that accord. And there's a distinct difference between creating a historical building and then creating, like, completely tearing down the building and building a replica of the building. A replica is not necessarily applying the historical building code to it. It's not historic anymore. We're building a replica that looks historic. So, we have to take all those things into consideration when we're doing that. When we have a mixture of new versus old, we would apply the historical building code in the existing area, and the new building code would be applied to, and the current building code would be applied to the new portion of the building.
Okay.
So the Avenidas building, which is now currently under construction and expansion, was a case in point where they had.
Finished, but
What's that?
It's finished.
Is it
they had an
finished?
opening a couple weeks ago.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm behind the times.
Getting darn close.
Yeah. So, that's the original City Hall
Yes.
police building. And I remember when we reviewed it, that they had issues about floor levels, because the new addition, they wanted higher ceilings, and so they were trying to figure out how to blend that in. But the old building, I think, was renovated under the California Historic Building Code, of course, just as you described. It's kind of a tricky issue. Could you talk a little bit about really the nuts and bolts about the application? So you said it's up to the applicant to really do the research and demonstrate how the historic building code could apply to their building. So, Right, so the process, it sounds to me, is that applicant has an idea of a project, they want to renovate, expand a historic building. They get a historic resources inventory or evaluation report. They incorporate that into their building plans. They determine what section of the building would apply to historic building code and what, if there's an addition, that would not. And then I think there's a requirement, I read, that the city actually designate the building as part of their inventory. It has to be a category 1 to 4. Is that part of the ordinance that
So
it's in?
what I'm seeing in the stuff that we unearthed for this meeting is that it does not have to be on the city's inventory. It can also be eligible for California Register, which is, we have some of those.
So I thought it said in the materials that the HRB had to determine that the building was eligible, no?
No, I mean, we have some that, okay, so we have some on file at the state, some being the Dames and Moore effort, 165 of them ended up at the state as National Register eligible. They're also California Register eligible. So those are all allowed to use this. As we go forward, and per policy 7.2, other buildings come up and are found to be eligible. The question by our consultant, the question is, do we then send those to the state? Is there a process? This is what I was alluding to earlier. Certainly if somebody wants to use the historic building code and they come forward and say, hey, we want to be actually on your inventory, or, send that off to the state, then I guess we could do that. It just, we haven't set that whole program up.
So on page 63 of our materials, on paragraph, this is the city ordinance, adopted city ordinance from June, from 2016. So 16.49.040, designation of historic structures. And it talks about the procedure for designating this, and as I read through this, I thought that suggested that there needs to be a designation prior to the application of the building code. Is that not correct?
Well, this needs to be on the list.
Well, so this is for the inventory, category 1, 2, 3, or 4. But if it's eligible, then the state building code allows us, and that's in packet.
That's
P.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah.
If you're not on the list, then to use the historic, then you better be on some list. And then, so here's a process to get
Right, I
on
see.
a list.
Okay, so that's,
This is a process to get on a local list.
right.
So
Right,
just,
so packet page 8 has this is what George had provided, packet page 8 was the current paragraph that's section 818.955, and I bolded it because I thought it was interesting. This shall include historical buildings or properties on or determined eligible for. Okay, so if we have determined something, if the city has gotten its consultant to determine that it's eligible for California, then I think that's enough.
Right.
We haven't put it on our inventory, but I think that's okay. If you read this literally, and it works, yeah.
but what
So-
about a historic
Go ahead.
district?
Well, the historic district would qualify
that be
because
automatically
everything
qualify? Yeah,
in the
okay, that's
district is considered part of
Right.
it. But an Eichler, for instance, is not probably going to be listed anywhere. It's certainly, individual Eichlers are eligible, even though the city resolution,
Well, they would have to be found eligible through an HRE,
right,
and we're not going about and doing that proactively or anything.
yeah, no.
Um,
So if for some reason an Eichler homeowner wanted to use the historic building code for whatever reason, I mean, it's a long process, but that's doable.
Are we thinking that Eichlers need this kind of thing?
I don't know. I can't imagine why they would want to use the historic building code, but,
If it saves money for construction, that's why you want it.
yeah.
I mean, retain a glass window that should be tempered glass, I don't know, a big, one of those big
Yeah, right.
windows. Is that-
That's actually the first thing I thought about, is those plate glass windows that were not tempered when they were installed. And who would want that?
Well, who would remove it unless it got broken? Because that makes the house, I mean,
Yeah, I guess, but if you're doing an entire renovation of a house, you'd trigger the 50% rule. Wouldn't that glass have to be upgraded to tempered glass? Meet current,
Only if you're replacing,
The glass.
If you're replacing the glass.
oh, yeah. Okay.
That's probably an expensive piece of glass.
Yeah, those are huge pieces. Okay, sorry to interrupt or digress.
Good
but-
example.
But I mean, in those type of situations, it really depends on how aggressive the remodel would be on an ICLA home like that. I mean, because you would also apply the California Energy Code, and maybe to meet the California Energy Code, they would need to replace the exterior glazing to
Right.
meet the U factors and SGC factors and
Yeah, really.
reach their TD values that they need to meet to comply with codes. So there's a lot of different drivers that establish what the actual requirements are. The section, just briefly go back to the section of purpose and how we apply the purpose in the section that Amy had read was straight out of the Historical Building Code, Chapter 8.1, which is the administrative portion, 8-101.2. So that's where that language directly came from. So in combination with the guidance that's in this document, as well as what's in our local ordinances and the state law, that's how we establish
So, and at one point, you know, and this is a planning thing too, it's, at one point, if somebody's, demoing or modifying a building more than 50%, is the whole valuation thing, then, they wouldn't be able to use the historic building code because it's no longer existing to the point, so if an Eichler or somebody comes in and wants to do something so major that it's no longer there, then they can't use it.
I think it's just, I've used it before, especially the archaic materials. It's,
Microphone.
Anyway, so I think it's I think it's a well-written ordinance. It's, we've done things where we've actually analyzed the wood fiber of 2x4s that you can't drive a nail through because it's so strong. So it's, anyway, but the archaic materials are really listed here. When we use, stucco has shear value, Yeah. And there are words in here saying, is it reasonable? And then that's where the proof of the engineer. So we've done engineering prior to your tenure here. We've done actually engineering analysis of the wood fiber. And that was Fred Herman was the inspector. And he said, look, it meets the strength. And he said, yeah, mathematically it does. So anyway. So the idea of archaic materials, it's a great chapter here.
I had an interesting kind of follow-up to that, and also related to liability. So in the archaic materials, as far as like a lot of the foundation materials, masonry, adobe, things like that, it says you can actually replace them with like kind. Does that require? Because I would imagine it would be on a testing and existing. I would imagine that's something that could be done, but I would find it hard to believe that a structural engineer would sign off on replacing a brick wall, because does that ever become an issue? Say you had a brick wall that you wanted to replace with the same materials rather than tuck point it, wouldn't you need a structural engineer to sign off on actually replacing that? Or
Yeah,
would,
yes.
but how would you find one who would be able to calculate masonry? I'm just being in a serious way, right?
Yeah, well, here's the project.
Because you do have that, the sign-off procedure, right?
Yeah, so to answer your question, how do you find an engineer? Well, my engineer has the records, he has a collection of old building codes from 1920. So that's how he'd find out what the code was in 1920.
I was more thinking from the liability perspective, because structural engineers generally they like to over-architect, and they don't like to sign off, they like to over-engineer. So I'm saying, even if you could find those codes, how would you find one who would be willing to sign off on that? I think that would be hard, but maybe you know someone.
Yeah, well, you are correct that I would say any person of any profession, they're going to have their limits of comfort zone of what they're willing to do. So, yeah, it does come down to the individual provider of service, for sure. Yeah.
It's interesting, I'm noticing on packet page 55, which says qualified historical districts, sites, and open spaces. So I'm trying to imagine in what scenario, now we're in Professorville, or we're in one of the two Eichler national districts, what, does that mean it applies to all the properties in the district that are eligible? For instance, in Professorville, not all of those homes are historic, There's some new homes in there. Just because they're in the district doesn't mean they're eligible to take advantage of the historic building code. It's kind of interesting that's in here as a,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, it does say the word qualified. So, for example, a non-contributor to a historic district,
Oh, is this on the same page?
packet page 55,
Okay.
8-01001.2 scope. That's the paragraph you were reading, Amy?
Yeah,
Yeah, it says qualified. So if there's a non-contributing building in a Professorville district, for example,
right,
I would believe that be considered a non-qualified building.
yeah.
Right, so a new building in a historic district doesn't contribute,
qualify, yeah.
right, so it wouldn't
Wanna be
qualify.
silly
Yeah,
to
right, yeah.
apply it to
Right.
that one.
But the district is the sum of its qualified
Yeah.
historic buildings. And I can only think of, in Sacramento, they have that historic district down near the Railroad Museum, where every single building is, or almost every
Old
building
Town.
is, yeah, Old Town, right, is an historic building. In that case, everything would qualify, but in Professorville, there'd be lots of buildings that
Yeah, that
would
wouldn't.
not. So,
Yeah, Preservation Park comes to mind too.
Okay,
It's
so
transplanted.
it sounds like George, from your point of view, as long as, so it's up to the applicant to show enough data to make the point that, look, there's enough quality of historicism, I guess, yeah. And then here's our, almost make a proposal, engineering proposal, saying, we want to keep this stucco here, we want to keep this. And then here's some engineering comment for your review.
Yeah.
And then you make your determination, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the premise of our whole department
Yeah.
is we look at the proposals and determine if it's compliant or
Sure,
not.
yeah, yeah.
And work with the applicant
Right, yeah.
to provide a code compliant issue. To kind of get back to Brandon's concern about liability and using previous established things, it's really key for the structural engineer to be involved, to look at those assigned values of those materials being utilized. For instance, like the hollow clay tile situation, there's ways to strengthen that hollow clay tile that would not take away from the historical features. But then there's cases where it's not, especially when it's utilized for an exit way or a rated-in corridor, which happen quite frequently over time, and actually in the building across the street that was utilized. And we made the determination it was best for it to come out. We did leave it in aspects of the exterior wall, but we strengthened it, and we had the engineers strengthen it in an appropriate way. So
they have hollow tiles?
they still do. Those inset walls on the exterior of the few balcony areas up on the upper floors, that is hollow clay tile still, but it has a steel frame wall on the inside that's anchored and structurally designed to keep it in place. So it's just, there's a lot of technology out there these days. There's a lot of ways to get around it.
After the '89 earthquake, I demolished a single-story clay tile house. It was irretrievably damaged, and it was the most frightening experience. Basically, the excavator very carefully grabbed part of the building, trying to pull it towards the excavator, and the entire building crashed. I mean, there was just nothing there. And after that experience, I don't even want to be in a building that's hollow clay tile.
Yeah.
It's just scary. Anyway.
And then, George, can you speak about with ADA, what kind of accommodations, say, getting into a building with a wheelchair? I think there's something about if you can provide another exit, was it literally 200 feet or something from the main entrance? There's some exceptions.
Yeah,
where
there is.
where the ADA can be in the back rather than the street-facing facade. There may be some new comments you might have.
Martin, what page are you on?
Looking at packet
43?
page 58, I guess. Packet page 58, waivers from ADA requirements. Packet page 58,
Oh, yeah, I see.
equivalent facilitation.
58, all right.
So if there's street-facing facade and all of a sudden there's no way to comply with ADA, are the exceptions to that, does that become your approval for exceptions to that?
Yeah, it does. It does become
tried to do that at a building.
Your microphone.
I tried to do that at a building at Moffett Field, Building 20, which is now occupied by Carnegie Mellon, to put the ADA access in the back of the building. And it didn't work out so well. We actually had to remove a window and put a little elevator in the front of the building.
Oh, my gosh.
So the window was removed and a little door was made that looked like the window. But they said that that's not correct to require a disabled person to use something less than an able person would. You know, it's demeaning to them or something, you know, it diminishes them.
Sure. Who's the governing administrator on is that the federal government?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what department approves or projects on Moffett Field? Is it
Well, it had to go before, they had a chief building official there too,
Okay.
similar to like a city. But we had Page and Turnbull work as our consultant on that.
Yeah.
And they convinced me, I was the historic preservation officer at the time, that that would not fly by putting the ADA in the back of the building.
Yeah. So that goes back to George's comment about it. Each CBO has the authority to make a decision one way or another.
Yeah, but they convinced me not to go down that road.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It is important to take all those considerations
Yeah.
into,
So,
those aspects into consideration. And there are abilities for waivers, but there's also facilitation that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, going back to how do you document these trade-offs for life safety issues versus other life safety issues and how we improve that. It's about the documentation, reporting that we have done the best effort that we can, we've taken, and to all the sensitive measures as much as possible.
yeah, but the people affected by ADA are very vehement about not being treated as second-class citizens.
Yeah.
I understand, yeah.
So,
So if you look on packet page 57, there's that on the bottom, under section 8-603, packet page 57, there's the 200 feet that I was mentioning, where,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So I actually had a
Item
project
2.
in downtown Palo Alto, where it's a historic building, and that got approved, it was before George's time, where we put the ADA entrance 200 feet linear from the front door, and that meant it behind, so you had to go down the alley, Mac's Smoke Shop, and then the entrance is back there. But we used that 200 feet,
Really?
yeah. And then there's a little accessibility sign saying entrance and rear type of thing. But again, Mike McKinnon is pointing out the idea where the CBO, the chief building official he was working with, denied that. Yeah. Or at least said, don't even apply for that, yeah.
basically, they encourage us not to proceed with that.
Well, that's interesting. It also says here, item 3 on that same section, where security is a problem, remote monitoring may be used. So if you have a secondary entrance that serves as the ADA, you can have some kind of button that the person could push, right, and then allow.
Assistance.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, but it's up to, well. They pointed, it's up to the CBO, whose jurisdiction it is, to make the decisions, yeah.
Okay.
I think this table
But
was really created to kind of outline where these different sections are all illustrated in the body of the code, but kind of outline where the applicability could be versus a Title II project versus a Title III project for public entities, private entities, and burial. So taking into consideration what the intent and how the provisions are being applied. So this is really a tool, this Appendix A is a tool for the building official and their designees to try to make sure that we're facilitating it in the right discipline.
Yeah, this building has a power-assisted door, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you want to use that way, because it's hard to open if you don't use it that way.
I use them all the time, they're great, If your hands are full, you just
Yeah.
push it,
I've tried to run to the train at the end of the day, and it's hard to push manually, so
Yeah.
I don't use that one when I'm in a hurry.
And all the ADA ramps are great for bicyclists, and skateboarders.
Wow.
Any other questions, George? Well, he's here.
George,
He's
thank you for.
busy. Thank you for coming and
Coming.
spending time with us.
You're welcome. Hopefully this effort was helpful and provided some clarity.
Well, it's now a record for people to be able to hear your descriptions. I think that's probably the highest value.
Well, and it's nice to have it in a bound version. I'm going to keep this handy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
just one further question. It's kind of handrails. I think they're like 44 inches for porches, guardrails, 42. But if you have a historic property, where contextually it's not correct to have something 42 inches sticking up as a front porch.
That'd be actually a great question, George. Say we have a qualified historic building and there's a 38-inch high guardrail, or we call it guards now. Well, yeah,
So let's look, I mean, we can look at the requirement and see if we can find it here.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Yeah, somebody brought this up at the February meeting, handrails as an example of one of
Yeah.
these interests, that comes up a lot.
yeah. Well, it'd be the guard, the handrails are,
Guard,
yeah,
sorry.
it's a guard, yeah.
40.
Page, it's 8-504, page 10 in the historical building code.
Packet page,
42, maybe?
packet page
We'll find it.
42.
Oh, here it is. But yeah, 42, railings and
Back at page 42, there you go.
The last section.
Yeah, the height of the railing and guardrail and the spacing of the balusters may continue at their historical height and spacing unless a distinct hazard has been identified or created by a change of use and occupancy. So basically what that's saying is if you're utilizing it in the same fashion that you were before
Yeah,
the building,
yeah.
then it's probably okay unless it's falling down and gonna be a hazard.
Sure, yeah. It's funny, I've got a building where the guard is about this high. To me, it's a trip hazard.
Yeah.
Fall over. Oh, but,
Well, if you look across the street, there's railings, like Juliet balcony railings on the Historic University Art Building, and those are 24 inches.
But
Yeah.
that's not,
There's no access
no one's
to
gonna
it.
step
those aren't
out.
doors there.
Those are decorative.
Right, but it's an
You could,
example.
you could climb out the window, I suppose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at
I
your
don't
own
think-
risk.
I don't think there's
But
any,
if you
there's
look
nothing
at,
to stand
I
on.
think the Ramona side,
Mm-hmm.
there is some exterior balconies that have some
Access.
lower access.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we try to take all that stuff into consideration.
Okay, great.
So that's an example of where the code gives us a little bit of discretion, but also gives us some guidance.
Sure, yeah, good. Okay. Fantastic. It's been very useful. Thank you, George.
Thank you
Very
very
Thank you,
much.
really
Thank you,
appreciate
guys.
it.
It's
Yeah.
a pleasure meeting all of you.
We should have experts like you come more often.
Yeah, we should.
Keep that in mind. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, George.
Thanks for coming.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so we're at our last topic of discussion, which is community outreach regarding Palo Alto
What's his
Historic.
official title?
It's the Chief Building Official.
Oh, yeah, sounds cool.
Someone you should know, George.
Stay on good terms with him.
So I noted on item 4 in the staff report that that I would provide the historic preservation web pages at places, and I see that I did not do that, but I do have my computer.
on the
and
screen,
Yes,
yes.
we were looking at that earlier, so we've kind of covered that, I guess, to some extent.
So I think we're on page 71 of the packet.
Yeah. Oh, right, so this again this was my presentation that I prepared to give to the Realtor organization. They had requested that that I come out and give a presentation. So I prepared this and gave a presentation all about our program. This fall, it was in October. And so this just, so let you know what I've, and they had some additional requests that they wanted to know about building permits for housing units and such, so that was part of my presentation. But I basically covered, what is our program, showed them the Professorville map, showed them about the web pages, and that's where they can find things. Talked about the Eichler guidelines, talked about historic districts and our inventory, and explained that we have, incentives for categories 1 through 4. Talked about the Dames and Moore windshield survey that ended up with 165, National Register eligible homes. And then, and the one thing that is interesting is that 235 homes were deemed ineligible for National Register, but that didn't mean they were all ineligible for California Register. So that was kind of one of these things that I learned as part of this. So for instance, in one case, we had a National Register ineligible property that I had Page and Turnbull look at a little deeper to see if it was California Register, as one of these two-story home projects came through. So yeah, so there are 1,750 homes that weren't evaluated further, and these were all from circa 1948 and earlier. Obviously, there's more homes that haven't been evaluated now, since 1948. I told them about the process bulletin that we have, and I showed it to them. We have the Group A, Group B. I think we're, I don't know, everyone's familiar perhaps except Debbie, who hasn't been with us as long. But we have this bulletin that Margaret referred to earlier. This is one of our main tools to help people understand what the process is. That's packet page 81, 80 and 81. It's kind of hard to see page 80, but this is how we divide things into Group A or Group B. And then I told them about the comp plan policy and how we're doing that. Talked about criteria for designation of historic resources. So this came up earlier, if somebody wants to be on our inventory, which is our register, they can come forward and propose that they get on or elevate their category from a 3 to a 2 as the toy shop is planning to do, so that they can ask for the TDRs or bonus floor area. Okay, so anyways, this is just to let you know what I've been up to as far as exhausting the realtors with all this information.
I did find, I knew I'd seen in this packet, there were incentives on page 85. You actually have zoning code exceptions and incentives, floor area exemptions, attics of 500 square feet, basements, et cetera, minimum lot size exemptions, and home improvement exceptions yielding up to 250. These are, I knew I had seen them somewhere, but I just couldn't put my fingers on them earlier. This is a good starting list.
Yeah.
What I'd hope to add to that is expedited review time, which would be a nice thing to be able to offer people who want to do historic renovations. Public Works, especially, expedited Public Works review. Martin?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with what Margaret Wimmer was just saying, is that, yeah, expediting is great. That would probably need additional staff resources, and I believe that that's not available right now. But I would think it would take additional staff resource
Well,
to
so
expedite.
there's staff and there's staff. I mean, you mentioned Public Works,
They do,
what kind of control do we have over Public Works? None.
Yeah.
It's a city agency.
It is, yes, I agree.
yeah.
But, that's a conversation that we can have as
Sure.
far as what types of permits. So Public Works permits themselves that are not planning permits are, right-of-way encroachments, street work permits, this kind of thing. And then Public Works also reviews our planning permits and our building permits. So where is the sticking point with Public Works is where I'd like to understand it.
So again, in my ancient experience, which is not currently up to date, there used to be a big bottleneck at building plan review. And the city solved that problem by outsourcing that to private agencies that were identified by, actually, I think the city now, they just send them to somebody.
Correct, yeah.
When I was working, we could choose. So that took a 4-month review time down to a 7 to 10 day review time. And then it would go to Public Works and would just sit there. And, they'd have to review it, and there are all these issues that would come back. Where's the driveway cut going to be? Could you use the same driveway cut? Those are the only two I can remember. Sidewalks, do they need to be replaced? Now, I don't know, it just seems to me that one of the ways you could incentivize people to use, to preserve their historic buildings is say, okay, you apply, we'll put you at the top of the stack. Now, I mean, who would like that if you were not a historic building?
Exactly, yeah.
Not anybody, but I'm just thinking out loud. Incentives are just that,
Yeah, so a city
make it worth somebody.
has tools, right? So I think the Public Works does have the same tool that building has had for years.
Really?
They do
So they're outsourcing? Yeah, good.
some of their stuff.
That's
so.
great. All right. Any other comments?
I have a question regarding, going back to the historic category A, or I mean, say, it's called the plan, let's see, type A and type B, what? Group A, yeah, thank you. Type A, Group A and Group B.
That's a class.
Yeah, yeah. That if a building is determined, or a project is determined to meet the conformance with the Secretary of Interior standards, then that removes any CEQA analysis, is that correct? If it's, yeah.
Oh, so if we have an HRE, a good one, not just the two-pager from the 1970s inventory, and we're able to perform a Secretary of Interior Standards compliance review because we have enough information about the character-defining features, et cetera, then there's no CEQA review. Is that what you're?
That's what I'm asking,
That's
yeah,
what you're
yeah,
asking?
and I
Yes.
like your answer, good,
Yeah.
good.
Sometimes we have, homes that are on the inventory and somebody comes in and wants to change them. And those 1970s inventory forms, if you've seen them, are, a two-sided, yeah, this is a nice old building, basically. Owned by so-and-so, and so they moved out in whatever era. So it doesn't have enough there for us to
Okay.
help with that, when we can guess at it, but
Sure, yeah.
it's nice to have more robust information about the home.
Okay, well, good, okay, yeah. So the focus would be on, the focus would be to, so if the project is deemed to be conforming with Secretary of Interior standards, and that change, then
Right,
it's
and
not a.
it's exempt
Exempt, good,
from
thank,
CEQA,
great,
yeah.
thank you.
Okay, just one point of going back to page 84. The first sentence up here, the structure is identified with lives of historic people or important events in the city, state, or nation. We have discussed in the past doing a review of the technical facilities in the city, and that seems, that fits into important events. Some of the tech facilities have never been captured as being historically significant. Where do we stand on that?
I'd like to offer some information about the past, what do they have, those walks? I can't. Historic tours, sorry, walking tours. And just last fall, Bo Crane and I led a tech walk of the downtown area where Bo had inventoried the various places where tech companies had started. And obviously, and we ended at the Hewlett-Packard garage property. But there is, I'm sure I can get Bo to forward that to me, and
I can
I'll
go,
forward
it's
to you.
2 doors from
Yeah.
my house.
But it's a pretty interesting thing, and it's not even remotely exhaustive. I mean, he's done a huge amount of work, but there's still more stuff. And he has also, parenthetically, just finished a list of rock star sites in Palo Alto, places where rock stars were born or lived or created bands, and it's really astoundingly interesting.
Who's
Yeah.
doing this?
Bo Crane,
Bo Crane is a board member of Palo Alto Stanford Heritage.
Oh, yeah.
it's 2 doors from me.
And
Yeah.
if we, someday when we have the Palo Alto Museum or History Museum, all of that hopefully will be interpreted.
Right. I've actually asked Bo if he'd be interested in coming and talking to the HRB about this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I just
sure.
got a strange memory.
Maybe we could put it on the agenda, or a future meeting. Don't
Sure.
know.
But
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
The
What-
future museum is over there.
Roth Building.
I think for some reason, I haven't, I'm,
Oh, turn on your mic.
oh.
I keep getting
I'm
texts
having a
about
bit of a memory problem anyway, but I think I took a bunch of stuff and put it in one of those little rooms in that place. I think it was, maybe it's stuff's still there. I can't remember what it was, but I remember going down there and filling this little room with some of my stuff, and I don't know what it was.
Well, it's probably over at Coverly now. Because everything that there were some records down there,
Yeah.
but I think they've been moved to the
Okay.
Coverly. Yeah,
Okay,
and
well,
all the
I'll
stuff in
check
the,
that
in the
out.
basement of the main library, the Rinconada Library, moved over there. And all of that eventually is gonna come back.
So they're gonna redo my high school Coverly. It's gonna get all wiped out and redone.
Oh, yeah?
Maybe.
Yeah, it's, you
Well,
see in the
let's-
paper, they're redoing the whole
Yeah,
thing.
that's not on the agenda
That's not
either,
on our
but,
agenda.
Well, I'm just
you know-
saying, maybe it should be. That's what I guess I'm.
there's another topic. So there are a number of topics that, being that we don't have a lot of projects come through this board, stuff that was mentioned today, perhaps David and I will have a meeting and talk through some of the topics that were brought up today and think about, given that he's going to be out for a few meetings, which dates might be appropriate for study sessions or something.
Certainly can have meetings without me.
Well, sure, but, we need to mastermind what's going to
Sure.
come when and what's more important to come sooner and
Yeah,
later.
well,
Okay.
that tech facility thing was emphasized by one of our former deputy mayors. Yeah, I can't recall his name right now, but he was very interested in us pursuing the contributions of the tech facilities that existed in Silicon Valley. Here, this is supposed to be the epicenter of technology,
Yeah.
and we haven't recognized any of these buildings.
That's right.
We're up to a lot of criticism for that.
Yeah, this is the one right here that
Yeah.
I drive by almost every day.
Okay, we have probably finished the topic on outreach. Mark?
Oh, does outreach include the, how do we going back to Board Member McKinnon's comment, previous meeting about the outreach, using Pasadena as a model? Is outreach part of that, of the subject of outreach?
Remind me what your comment was?
Well, I said we probably should do more in the way of outreach with the community to have them recognize. We certainly should have something highlighting the local significant architects and builders who have built this town
Yeah.
and made it historically correct.
Yeah.
I don't see anything like that.
One comment I had, and when I was president of PAST, I brought this subject up, and that was, who are the next generation of historic building property owners? And that's the children of people who own historic buildings today. So is there anything in the school system, how can we reach school children and teach local history so that they understand as teenagers this historic environment, instead of waiting for adults to learn about it?
So one of the things we talked about at last night's past board meeting, speaking of outreach, is this is the 125th anniversary of Palo Alto. And next year will be the 100th anniversary of Burge Clark's first buildings. Now, he actually was, or participated in the design of the Hoover House at Stanford, but apparently he was, I was told last night, he was assigned that job, but his first buildings in Palo Alto were built in 1920, and that's something that we could certainly celebrate or recognize. That's pretty significant, 100 in a small community like Palo Alto in 1920, to have buildings that one architect, and Pedro de Lama is the other one, have them survive 100 years. It's pretty significant achievement.
So from people, my colleagues in Italy laugh at that idea.
Well, okay, well, this is not Italy, this is Palo Alto.
I know, but I just say, they always laugh.
125 years ago, there was not a lot here.
Of
In
course.
fact, I don't know that there are any buildings that survive from 1894, except maybe the water tower. The water tower building might, but I think,
The oldest house in Palo Alto in College Terrace, that came up recently, I'm trying to think of the address. It's a Victorian.
Well, I know in Pasadena, there's a group called Pasadena Heritage. They celebrate a lot of their significant architects, Green and Green. And there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
whole number of different architects that were
Right.
very significant in contributing to the arts and crafts movement in Pasadena. But that is exposed to the the people in that town continually.
In Pasadena, in the Central Business District, for example, on all the corners of all the streets, it actually talks about the history of what happened on that street. There's like a large plaque like this, and it says who owned the building, what happened here, and all that stuff, so that people of all ages, including children, start getting that information right away. Yeah.
If that isn't passed on, it's going to be lost. We've got some significant contributors here in this town that.
Okay,
Yeah, it seems like a good thing for past to,
yeah, that's true. Are we done with outreach? Let's, we don't have any subcommittee reports. Board members' announcements, or, I would like to highlight tonight's meeting with Supervisor Submidian I guess it's in the council chambers or in this room. And it's a open house, no, it's a constituent meeting about the Stanford General Use Permit, focused on that. And there is as I'm sure you all know, there's a significant proposal by Stanford relating to their historic buildings. And we had that proposal reviewed for us at a meeting last year when Laura Jones, Stanford historian, came. And they are still, they're pushing a very, very narrow application of criteria that I think is going to get relatively significant pushback. Not clear why Stanford should have their own unique historic review of their properties. So encourage all that can to watch or participate in any way. It's pretty significant. Stanford, of course, is a big partner with Palo Alto, and
Do you know what time the meeting is?
6:30, I think.
That's tonight?
Yeah. Is that right, Debbie? You would,
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Go, but you're reminding
Sure, right here.
yeah, it's in this building. I think it's going to be in the council chambers because there will be a relatively, I think, robust conversation. Martin?
So let me close that door.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Then I'll make my comment.
Okay.
Great, thank. On this Sunday, I don't have the meeting date and location. This Sunday, there's a discussion regarding the state Senate Bill 50.
All right.
And significant legislators are going to be there. I can email maybe that if people want to know, I can email you.
Sure,
the
I'll
date.
send that.
Yeah. And the discussion is Senate Senate Bill 50 is proposing that cities will not have any control on the heights of buildings,
Zoning, yeah.
including residential zones that are near transit areas. So Professorville is near a transit district area. And then, so no height limit, or they can go up to 50 feet. And anyway, that's this Sunday. Yeah.
Imagine just for commercial areas, right?
No,
It says
it's
transit,
any
any place near
area.
transit, period. Doesn't matter if it's zoned for commercial or residential.
There are specific zones if you're within 2,000 feet of a major transit hub, like the the Palo Alto Depot,
Yeah.
then that's one zone. That's the hottest zone.
Yeah.
Okay, 2,000 feet?
Or maybe even less, because then there's a quarter-mile zone,
That's
Yeah.
like a walk.
and then there's a half-mile zone. And my house, for instance, is in the half-mile zone because University Avenue is considered a major transportation center, artery. So we could have a 5-story building built next door to us. Pretty amazing. And it's this came up last year. This is Senator Leno, is it?
No, Wiener,
Wiener, right, the former San Francisco supervisor.
right.
And the purpose of this is to develop housing, residential housing, but it's blunt force trauma on local planning decisions.
Mayor Filseth had made reference to it at his State of the
Right,
City
yeah.
address, yeah. And he showed examples of a house, an Eichler house over here, and a 50-story building, 5-story building right next to it. Anyway, so that'd be, if that becomes state law,
that says to the cities, well, thank you for your zoning ideas, but here's what you're gonna, a developer's gonna be allowed to do.
Right,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a developer,
And how's that transform into, how's that conflict with any of the historic preservation goals? Yeah.
doesn't.
So I want to be cognizant of time and parking.
Yep,
Oh, yeah.
I think, all right, any other announcements? No, and so I think that completes our meeting. Thank you very much for all your contributions. See you. Amy, any idea when our next meeting will occur?
Well, I was going to go back and look at when you said you weren't going to be here.
What, next 2 weeks from now, did you have anything on that?
Somebody was not, you weren't going to be here on the 11th either.
Right.
So I would say the next one is.
25th?
April 25th.
All right.
If we want to have all
Sure.
available.
Good, well, let's work on our
Chatting
agenda.
about what we might put on the agenda.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.